So first, my shirt, a revivalist, is, in case you don't know what that is, it's an individual that brings life to something that was once dead. And that's kind of what I spend my life doing, is speaking life into other people, because I went through a lot of stuff in my life, and God has put the Spirit, the Holy Spirit in me to be able to speak life and encourage people in their situations, because I've been through probably every scenario that you could play out in life. To give you my background, like I was just talking to Peyton, my parents were married for 22 years, and where the trouble in my life started was when I became a teenager, which is typically, especially with boys, where you tend to stray off. We end up looking for crowds or groups of people that maybe are not the best for us. And I came from a very loving home, like I'm sure most of you have come from or have. And when my parents got divorced when I was 13, it really took a toll on me, because I didn't understand what was happening. And the family that I had known all of my life was now being destroyed. So because of that, I started to hang around the wrong groups of people, because I was ultimately looking for acceptance to be in another group or a family, and that group was not good for me. There was a there was a kid in my neighborhood that I had this bond with from the start when we met, but he was not a good person. He had influence over people, and when I explain my story, I talk about it kind of like, if you've watched the Fast and Furious movies, he was like a Dominic Toretto, except the character in that movie is not really bad per se, but he had that kind of influence over people to where people were drawn to him because everybody liked him, and he had all the money, and he had all the things in life that people wanted. So hanging around him, my life started to get very destructive. I was Because of being around him, I was brought into a circle of bad kids that ultimately were in a gang, and I got involved in a gang in middle school, and I was selling candy and doing all different things, making money in school. We were intimidating other kids, just doing bad things, and it was all because I was looking for acceptance from somebody, because my family was broken up and I wasn't hanging around the right people. So once my parents, started to see my life kind of declining and me getting into trouble and being suspended from school and getting into fights, they decided to hold me back in middle school to get me away from this crowd of kids. They were about to go into high school, and I would have been going with them, but my parents talked to the school board and said that we're going to hold our son back to get away from this crowd of kids. And to be honest with you, it probably saved my life. It was probably the first instance in my life that God had used my parents to save my life. A year later, I had found out that the kid I was, drawn to, that was the leader of this gang, he was killed in a car accident. And him and I were inseparable, before my parents held me back. And honestly, I probably would have been in the car with him, had my parents not done that. And I couldn't see that at the time until I look back at my life now, and I could see, why that had to happen. And once my parents held me back, I was doing good. I made new friends. They had a much positive influence in my life, and life continued to go pretty well. And then years later, I got sucked into addiction. I started experimenting with smoking weed, and had drinks now and then. I really wasn't drawn to alcohol that much though. And then I was involved in a car accident where I had never been in a car accident before, and I never really had any pain. I was pretty pain free of my life, and when I was in the car accident, it broke discs in my back and neck. And I was referred to pain management. I was referred to a doctor. I don't really like doctors, but I was in a position in my life where I needed some kind of help, and I didn't really know what to do. And I warn people about this all the time because of my story, is doctors are not always there to help you. They're there to give you drugs and get you hooked on drugs that you may never get off of. And that's what they did to me. They took MRIs and x-rays of my back and neck, and they said, they told me I would be in a wheelchair in 2 years, and I refused to accept that, because if you take something like that into your heart, there's a good possibility that may be the outcome. There's a saying that your mind is the strongest muscle in your body, so where the mind goes, the body will follow. So if you believe that, then that may be your outcome in life. And when I was in the accident, they started putting me on Vicodin and Percocet, and that eventually led to stronger drugs because I told them those drugs were upsetting my stomach, and their solution to that was to give me stronger drugs. And the doctors had opened a door that wreaked havoc on my life. It was basically like feeding a demon that I had inside of me, and I just could not get enough. I needed more and more of these drugs as I got hooked on them, and I was doctor shopping. I was going to multiple different doctors getting prescriptions, and they didn't know about each other, and 100 and something pills was just not enough for the month. I was just taking them by the handful. And this demon inside me just kept growing and growing, and I was losing control of my life. I was losing jobs, I was losing friends and relationships and people in my family, and I couldn't get enough. It was spiraling my life into this dark world, and it soon led from doctor shopping. The doctors ended up finding out about each other, and they all kicked me out of practice. They told me typically we arrest somebody for this, for doctor shopping. It's an actual crime. And they said, we're not going to do that. We're going to write your name on a list, and no doctor will touch you. So you will not be able to get these drugs from any other doctor. Well, me being crafty and learning how to maneuver in the system, I figured out other ways to be able to get these drugs that my body needed. It was dependent on these drugs, and it had such a strong hold of my life that I couldn't break free of it. So I ended up going to the methadone clinic, as that was my solution, was since the doctors were no longer going to give me these drugs, then I'll go to a clinic that is designed to help you get off of these drugs. Problem is, the clinic doesn't care about you getting off of these drugs, they just hook you on another drug. So instead of taking prescription pills, I was now on methadone. And in the methadone clinic, you have two options, and that's either Suboxone or methadone. Both are highly addictive, maybe even more so than the actual pills themselves. So I went into the clinic looking for help, and they ended up creating a worse addiction because they just kept giving me more and more of the methadone, and the addiction in me just kept asking for more, and they just kept giving me more. So eventually I got to the point where they're like, hey, we gotta keep you where you're at. But they were not helping me. They were just spiraling my addiction worse. So I still continued to buy pills on the street, and I still continued to use. They eventually drug tested me and found out I had other drugs in my system, which that part of the protocol is you can have nothing else but what they give you, or they'll kick you out. So they kicked me out of care, which then led me back to a position in my life where I wasn't sure what I was going to do, because I was banned from the doctors, and now I was kicked out of the methadone clinic, so I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. That ended up leading me to heroin use. And I soon ended up injecting heroin, and my addiction went from swallowing pills to snorting pills to injecting pills, and my life was becoming very dark and scary. Basically, I was living a life I didn't know if I was going to wake up the next day, I had a couple of close encounters where I almost overdosed, and finally, after going through all this, I said I need to go to rehab. I need to get help. And I went to Axe Detox in Tampa. That was the detox I went to, and I spent 30 days in board treatment of basically being locked up in a facility like a jail, not being allowed to leave. Even though I came in voluntarily, it was still treated the same because there were people court ordered to be there that were not allowed to leave. So I had permission to leave at any time I wanted after I was there at least for a week. So I was the perfect candidate in rehab. You know, I had crossed every I, dotted every T, crossed every I, and I left there. I felt after 30 days I was okay to go back into the world. My girlfriend at the time was still continuing to use, and I eventually got sucked back up into that circle again because I was around people still doing it. And even though I thought I was strong enough in a place in my life to stand my ground, I wasn't in a healthy environment. So I still continued to fall back into addiction once again, which led me to go back to another doctor to get on Suboxone. So I thought that Suboxone would help to get me off of everything, which again is still a very addictive drug. And God kept putting in my heart, my girlfriend at the time told me she was pregnant with our son. And that was the main driving factor for me to change my life. I said, I don't want this kind of life for my son. If I'm still involved in this life, he's going to be involved in it. So God kept putting it in my heart to give this up, but I didn't know how. I knew I tried rehab, I tried the methadone clinic, I tried all these resources for help, but I physically could not do it alone. So I had made the decision to quit the doctor, and I walked in there to tell them that I quit, and they kind of laughed at me, and they told me that nobody can quit this kind of life. And I told them, well, I'm going to be the first one that does. And that's how I walked out the door. And when I came back to my house, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't have any more drugs. I was not going to go looking for them. I started deleting everybody out of my phone. All my friends were a part of that life. And I said, I'm going to forget all them people, and I'm just going to start over. And my dad had been a believer in God and following God for about 40 years of his life, and he was a very positive influence to me. And he said, you know, I want you to watch this pastor online. And I remember sitting in my room, you know, just made the decision to quit this life, and my body was withdrawn. I was, you know, sweating and, you know, chills, going through all this stuff. And I turned on this service on my laptop, and it was a pastor named Jim Raley. And as soon as I turned on the 7 o'clock service, once the preacher started talking, that message was directly to me, not to anyone else online or anyone that was in the church. And the moment was so powerful that God had moved into my life, into my heart for the first time. And to give you some background, my parents they drug me to church for years, you know, every Sunday, religiously, different churches, different denomination, and nothing worked. And I always explain to people, the solution that we're looking for is God. He's the only one that can break addictions, can heal pain that's in your heart, heartbreak, you know, traumas, whatever it is, he can erase it all. And I didn't really believe that until I walked through life and I got to witness it in my own life. I had witnessed it in other people's lives, but I didn't have it in my own life. So in that moment of being vulnerable and, you know, full-blown withdrawal, not knowing if I was going to make it out of this thing, I had the mindset of either this was going to kill me, I was going to die through the withdrawals, or I was going to make it out the other side, and I was going to have a totally different life than the one I have had for so many years. So in that message, he came into my heart, And it didn't change my circumstance initially. I still went through the withdrawals, but he gave me this strength, this desire to not want to that I never had before. And I was able to break this pill and heroin addiction out of my life. So, spent about 3 weeks, almost a month at home, just, getting the withdrawals out of me, kind of my body rebalancing back to normal, because it usually takes about a couple weeks. And then, my life started to change. I started, following pastors online, and I was developing a relationship with God. And then I had made the decision to get into the gym. I was like, when you get rid of a negative, you need to replace it with a positive. There's a void. And if you don't fill it with something good, you're exposed to allow more darkness to come in you. So I joined the gym. I was like, it's a good thing, to get healthy, just to have some positive things to do. And at first it started out really well. And then eventually I got sucked into steroid use because I was unhappy with how my body looked. I was again looking for another substance. So I had been delivered from narcotic addiction, but now I was addicted to my body per se. I needed these steroids because I was still unhappy with me on the inside, and these drugs changed me. They, my whole appearance changed, my mentality changed. I started to go back into that darkness again, and I have been sucked up in that life for quite some time. And God had said that I needed to give that up as well. Even though I had I went to a doctor, they took my blood, they said, hey, your testosterone is low, I have every reason to be on these type of drugs, but again, it's a drug at the end of the day. So there's a lot of people in life that stay in addiction because they think it's okay because a doctor gives it to them. Whether you get it on the street or a doctor gives it to you, addiction is addiction. So, I gave that up. I was able to quit taking steroids. It took a little while for my body to again balance back out to normal. But, I have currently in my life, I'm 12 years out of any addiction. I have zero addictions to anything. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke weed. I don't take any kind of drugs, and I live my life completely sober, but I could not do any of that if it wasn't for God. God was the number one key denominator that broke every addiction and stronghold in my life. So I always say to people, to encourage them is, if you're dealing with an addiction or you're dealing with a pain or something, that you feel like you can't get beyond, that's when you lean on Him, because he will deliver that from you. And I'm a clear testimony of that. As God has continued to move in my life has completely changed. I went from a drug addict to now a person that delivers people from addiction, by pointing to God. I don't have the power to do it, but I can lead them in the right direction. And since following God, I've been baptized, and I'm part of a ministry. I'm a member of my church. I go around and I speak to people about this kind of thing, and God has used my pain, which He does in all of our lives, to help other people. I went through a lot of these things in order to be able to help others that are going through it now. So, I think what your teacher is doing is a very amazing thing here. We need more people like this in life, because there's a lot of people that are suffering with addiction. I'm actually finishing writing a book right now that's about my life story, and it's titled Breaking Addiction Through Prayer. Because ultimately that's where everything starts, is through prayer. And once we invite God in, then He begins to move in our life and to break these strongholds. Because from the time of birth, we're born into addiction of some sort. It doesn't always necessarily mean it's drugs. There's many addictions in life. You could be addicted to women, you could be addicted to pornography. I mean, there's a long list of addictions. And the number one thing that breaks all addictions is God. You know, you may have the power to break some in your life, but there's ones that you're not going to be able to. So that's what I would say to encourage you kids, is that I've been through a lot of the stuff that you're going through now, and I can tell you that you can get past it. And when you get past it, God will use that situation for you to help somebody else. Myself from